Microeconomics, Adjunct Professor Moran, Microeconomics 112. We're discussing the demand for resources, and although it applies to land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, we're focusing on labor, but you can substitute any of the factors in these problems. In the last session, we learned that the rule for employing a certain number of workers is by setting the marginal revenue product equal to the marginal resource cost. Notice that it's abbreviated MRP equals MRC, but the R's stand for a different thing. How much extra money does an additional worker bring in? How much extra cost results by hiring the extra worker? And if the extra revenue that an additional worker brings in exceeds the additional cost of hiring them, then you hire them. But if it's costing more to hire the worker than the additional revenue that the worker is contributing, then you do not hire them. Okay. You're the president of Acme Toy Company manufacturing yo-yos. Acme's yo-yos are manufactured by yo-yo makers working at machines. You have been estimating how many yo-yos your company can make using different numbers of workers, and you try to decide how many workers to hire. Here is your table of number of workers. These are inputs. The number of workers produced at various number of inputs, and the change in number of yo-yos produced. So hopefully you recognize this as marginal physical product. How many extra yo-yos are falling off the assembly line? Numbers, not dollars. Numbers, the dollars would be marginal revenue product, okay, which we need to calculate. This is classic microeconomics. They'll give you a table. You have to know that you have to apply this rule, and you have to build the table out to get these variables to solve the problem. After the second worker is hired, assuming more workers still increases the number of yo-yos produced, but the extra number of yo-yos is getting smaller and smaller. That's because of the principle of diminishing marginal returns. So here we have increasing marginal returns, but here we have diminishing marginal returns. These numbers are they've calculated that for us. Yeah. Okay, these numbers are still positive, but they're just positive at a lower amount. So that's the principle of diminishing marginal product. You've also learned that the market for Acme's yo-yos is such that Acme can sell as many yo-yos as it wants for $2 each. That means that since, if we go back to pure competition, the market is setting the price of yo-yos at $2, and this firm, the individual firm, can sell as many yo-yos as it wants as $2. That's a perfectly elastic demand curve. So when you see that, you know that's a perfectly competitive firm in the sale of the product. And it can hire as many workers as it wants at $30 a day. So that means it's a wage taker. The market is setting the wage, and these firms are too small to influence either the price in the overall market of the good or the cost of the worker in the production process. You can decide how many workers to hire. You can find out how many workers should be hired by comparing the additional revenue, marginal revenue product, from hiring each worker with the cost of hiring an additional worker. In this case, $30, called marginal resource cost. Marginal revenue product, how much extra, taking the change in yo-yos times the price of the yo-yos, comparing that to the extra, and then, the change in the extra revenue resulting from one extra worker. Comparing that to the change in cost by hiring one more worker. Will the worker pay for himself? Okay, here's our table. So they gave us this information. And as practice, we're going to calculate this column, and then using the marginal physical product, actually using price and quantity produced, we're going to calculate total revenue. Then we're going to take the change in total revenue given an extra worker and calculate marginal revenue product. Okay. And then we're going to be able to apply our rule of marginal revenue product is marginal resource cost. Okay, so again, this is change in physical product divided by change in input. But the change in input is only changing by 1, so don't forget if these are 10s, you have to take a change in this divided by the change in 10. But these are only 1, so it masks that calculation. So marginals are always the change in 2 lines. Numbers going down because of the principle of diminishing marginal returns. The firm is selling in a perfectly on a perfectly less demand curve. Quantity sold, quantity demanded is equal the constant price. What's the total revenue? Take the total number of yo-yos produced, times it by 2. Price times quantity is total revenue. So this would be 2 times 50 is 100. 2 times 70 is 140. 2 times 85 is 170. 2 times 95 is 190. And 2 times 100 is 200. That's our total revenue. Our marginal revenue product is the change in total revenue divided by the change in inputs. How much, since we're focusing on product, it's the change in total revenue divided by the change in number of workers. But again, the change in number of workers is constant at 1. So 40, 60, 40, 30, 20, and 10. Why does the number of yo-yos produced decrease as more workers are hired? Principle of diminishing marginal returns. As you add additional units, of a variable input to a fixed plant capacity, output will at first go up at a faster rate, then it'll go up at a slower rate. So here it's increasing. Increase from 0 to 20, then only increase by 10, now we have diminishing returns here. Okay. If the wage rate is $30 a day, how many workers will you hire? Okay. If you have to pay to get one worker $30 and he can contribute an extra 40, would you hire him? Quantity of input, marginal revenue product, marginal resource cost. Marginal resource cost, the wage rate, is constant at 30. The first worker brings in 40. Marginal revenue product greater than marginal resource cost. The second worker is going to bring in an extra 60. It's only costing you 30. The third worker is bringing in an additional 40. But he's only costing you 30. The fourth worker is bringing in an extra 30, and he's costing you 30. You're said to be indifferent. In a one-on-one intro class, we're going to hire him. So you'd hire 4 workers. Last time, that marginal revenue product exceeds or equals marginal resource cost. So you'd hire 4 workers. If the demand for yo-yos increases, so that Acme can sell more as many yo-yos at once for $3 each, what effect would this have on employment? It would cause employment to rise. If we go ahead and recalculate the marginal revenue product, instead of 40, this number would be 60. This 60 would be 90. And you could work further down and get a 5th worker hired in this example. And you're going to see in the next unit, in the next session, that change in demand for a product, which would lead to an increase in its price, is something that will shift the demand for an input. And that would be a shift in demand for labor. Because, again, remember from our last session that the demand for our input is derived from the demand for the product. So if the demand for yo-yos increases, the demand for resources that produce yo-yos will also increase. To make as much firm as possible, this firm should hire an additional worker as long as the worker's marginal resource cost, marginal revenue product, is greater than this person's marginal resource cost. Our decision rule. Let's go ahead and graph the demand curve for labor. At $60, the demand would be for only one worker. At $60, the demand is one worker. If the wage rate fell to $60, two workers. Whoops, $60, two workers. If the wage rate fell to $40, the firm would hire three workers. If the wage rate fell to $20, the firm would hire five workers. If the wage rate fell to $10, the firm would hire six workers. 10 and 6, 20 and 5, 20 and 5, 30 and 4, and you connect that, and we have the demand for labor. Alright, now in our next session, so again, the rule to determine the number of workers hired is marginal revenue product equals marginal resource cost. Can a worker's output pay for him? Will he contribute more in revenue than his cost? And this revenue product is changing because of the principle of diminishing marginal returns. Okay, but this is constant because we're assuming the firm is hiring as a wage taker. He pays the same amount regardless of the number of workers hired. That's the rule. We've calculated our marginal revenue product and our marginal resource cost of 30. And compared and found out what number of workers will be hired. Now we're going to review things that cause the demand for an input. This is quantity of input. This is wage. We're going to investigate what causes the demand for a resource to change, either increase or decrease.